This month on Focus, Black Oklahoma, teachers in the state are being pushed to the brink. We look into the state of teaching during the COVID-19 pandemic and the substitutes and policymakers advocating for better.
We go in depth on critical race theory and the penalties against public institutions that teach concepts that the state legislature finds problematic.
White supremacist gangs are a growing threat in Southwest Oklahoma. We talk to Oklahomans who've had direct experiences with the United Aryan Brotherhood.
We also look to organizations that are holding space for the healing and processing of Black and brown death and how to have conversations about it with the whole family. Our series on mindfulness continues as we hear about mindfulness techniques to fight battles within the body.
And when it comes to Valentine's Day, we explore expectations, reality, and how sometimes less is indeed more. All this and more on Focus, Black Oklahoma.
Focus Black Oklahoma is sponsored by Phillips Theological Seminary, with guest lectures, sermons, and presentations for Black History and African American Heritage Month. Online at ptstulsa.edu/heritage.
This is Focus Black Oklahoma. I'm Kuma Roberts.
And I'm Colby Webster.
The challenges Oklahoma teachers face have only intensified with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Devin Williams has the story of how teachers, substitute teachers, policymakers, and more are coping with or even leaving the field altogether.
In 2018, Oklahoma educators and students organized a massive strike in response to the lack of educational support and the decades of budget cuts by the Oklahoma legislature. The movement garnered national support. Coverage from every major media outlet influenced Oklahoma lawmakers to draft and pass House Bills 1023XX and 1026XX. The bill secured new computer science standards and better support for first-year teachers. They also included an average annual salary increase of $6,180 for teachers. 4 years later, teachers and students have once again left the classroom in unprecedented numbers, not in protest, but due to the relentless effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. As the Omicron variant surges, it continues to expose weaknesses in the historically challenged Oklahoma educational system. 4 Tulsa Public School, or TPS teachers with various experience, backgrounds, and concerns expressed their exhaustion with Governor Kevin Stitt's executive order to replace verified substitute teachers with volunteers from the faith community, businesses, and state workers. Delrina Nguyen, a TPS middle school teacher, explained how substitute teaching is more than popping an educational film into a Blu-ray player.
What it does is it insults our students and says, hey, you aren't worth the time of an educated, qualified individual who knows their content area, but also knows how to treat you like the developing human person you are.
Amy Bracer, a veteran TPS science teacher with over 20 years of experience, found her love of teaching through substituting. She says many substitute teachers are either former or aspiring educators, while describing the rigorous week-long process it takes to become certified.
You need to be background checked, and you need to have a drug test.
I believe so.
And I think you have to be fingerprinted. And so in order to be fingerprinted, I think that was around $56. The background check was...
Mine was $53.
$75. And then you have a training. I believe you watch some videos. It takes about a week. They may have shortened that because of COVID, but there is some training.
Oklahoma's Secretary of Education, Ryan Walters, is a fervent supporter of the executive order. However, TPS science teacher Adam Johnston says there's a disconnect between lawmakers and teachers.
Individually, I think the way that I see the world and the way that I see problems that exist, challenges that exist in the world, I very quickly find myself looking at policies. I think that policies and budgets and system level decisions influence, for better or worse, a lot of the things that we experience day to day in the classroom and in our lives and other capacities. And so in Oklahoma, in particular, we see that there is, of course, a teacher shortage. Teachers are leaving all the time. My first year teaching, there was a billboard near the house that said something to the effect of, hey, teachers, make $10,000 to $15,000 more if you move south to Texas, which was really, really inspiring for a first year teacher to see each and every day. I can speak for myself that this is my fourth year teaching. It has rarely been easy. It has always been excellent. I consider teaching to be an incredible passion of mine. I think it is a core tenet of my identity. And all those things being said, my plan is to leave the classroom at the end of this year, where my goal will be shifting from being a teacher to once again being a full-time student in an education policy program, because again, the way that I see the world is problems and solutions come from policy. And when we see so many problems, the way that I see my best path moving forward is to hopefully work for policy solutions in the realm of education, because our kids deserve better, our teachers deserve better. To put it simply, I just cannot believe that this is the best that we can do in Oklahoma and in other places.
The perception of systemic educational failures by the Oklahoma legislature is not exclusive to public educators. Post-secondary educators like Professor Kayla Harding, an associate professor of developmental English at Tulsa Community College, raise similar concerns, especially for children in the North Tulsa community.
One thing that I thought about was the disparities that the African American students experience, specifically in schools like McLean or Central, even Booker T. I do feel for the students who are now underserved, and they're largely North Tulsa students, and because they're largely, because of all of the complicated things that go into being North Tulsa, they are largely minority, predominantly Black students. And so it's concerning. Being a Black girl from North Tulsa, it is concerning to me that so many of our students are in these conditions.
All of these different educators share one common belief. Oklahoma's elected officials are oblivious to the daily struggles of teachers. Professor Harding says the only way for lawmakers to represent teachers is to experience their trials.
I think if a lawmaker spent a day in the life of a teacher, shadowing a teacher, not being a substitute teacher, I think they would understand the profession a little bit differently. If I think back to when I taught third grade, and the hours I spent preparing my classroom for the next day, grading students' work, and just doing all the things that it took to make sure that my students were on level or prepared. I spent close to 60 hours, maybe more, in the classroom each week. I did home visits. I visited the homes of my students and their families. I spent so much time, in fact, that my oldest son practically, he thought he lived at the school. We were there so frequently. There are things that happen in just the day of a teacher that lawmakers aren't capable of understanding.
For Focus, Black Oklahoma, I'm Devin Williams in Tulsa.
Focus Black Oklahoma has been selected to participate in the Advancing Democracy cohort with the Solutions Journalism Network, or SJN. Our series, In a Confused State, will follow Oklahoma advocacy groups navigating new restrictions on freedoms in 4 areas: reproductive rights, voting laws, teaching history, and direct action and activism. Here, Crystal Patrick details views of critical race theory and the policies in place to penalize public institutions that teach slavery in a way not accepted by the current Oklahoma legislature. Here she is with more.
Last month, we looked at House Bill 1775, the controversial law that Governor Kevin Stitt signed last May. Critics condemn it both as an attack on critical race theory, or CRT, and more broadly, as an assault on the way history is taught in Oklahoma schools. This assault has gotten even more intense recently, and I'll explain how in this segment. First, let's go back a couple of months to December 2nd last year. That's when State Representative Jim Olson, a Republican from Rowland, introduced House Bill 2988. Andy Weber covered the story for KOCO 5 News.
This is the bill in its entirety. It's only 4 pages in length, written by State Rep Jim Olson. It takes aim at the 1619 Project, an initiative by the New York Times. It teaches that slavery played a major role in how our country was formed.
I wanted to write this bill in order to assure that our young people are taught our history properly and in proper context.
This pushback against the idea that slavery defines U.S. history is popular on the U.S. right. Commentators like Ben Shapiro, the conservative gadfly, attack it all the time. Here he is at Boston University in November 2019, mocking former Texas Representative and Democrat Beto O'Rourke.
Beto, cribbing from the New York Times 1619 Project in his quixotic quest for relevance, suggested that America was founded on racism and slavery. He said, quote, "Racism in America is endemic, brah. It is foundational. We can mark the creation of this country not at the 4th of July, 1776, but August 20th, 1619, when the first kidnapped American was brought to this country against his will."
Now, there's plenty to criticize about the way history is taught in U.S. schools, and there's ample room to improve the way we help young people think about the past. Take emancipation, for example. The way textbooks present this event, with Abraham Lincoln as the star liberator, seems right in line with those 19th century theories that elevated so-called great men over everyone else. But it's worth being skeptical of these accounts. To think, for example, about how broader historical forces both shaped and limited what Lincoln did. Nathaniel Martin Stroman, the stand-up comedian known professionally as Earthquake, made this point in Mississippi back in 2005.
White people talking about Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. No, he didn't. Polyester did.
And if you caught the third installment of our Battle for Greenwood series last November, you might remember University of Kentucky professor Joanne Mellish's point about the limits of abolitionism.
The idea that radical abolitionism, or abolitionism at all, of any sort, ultimately made a great change, I don't think is the case. Mr. Lincoln got himself elected saying, "We will not touch the slavery where it is. We will only keep it out of the territories." The initial Emancipation Proclamation is a war effort. It's an effort to burden the South with free people of color who will not work. So the idea that abolitionism, in any sense, ultimately prevails, I think is a mistaken idea, or it's a contributing factor to a complex situation that creates change over time.
Whether your style is comedic or academic, the basic takeaway here is clear. We need to think more critically about our history. But State Representative Olson's bill seems to strike the opposite stance. Here's KOCO's Andy Weber again.
His bill says students cannot and should not be taught that one single race was the oppressors and that one single race was the victims.
When the reality is that all races have been slave owners and all races have been victims of slaves.
State Representative Monroe Nichols, a Democrat from Tulsa, was quick to speak up after hearing Olson's proposal.
The fact that Jim Olson chooses to fight to romanticize the legacy of slave owners in the American South is a little strange, but as I said before, not all that surprising. Holocaust deniers, 9/11 deniers, Sandy Hook deniers, and then we have Jim Olson with his denial of American slavery.
And here's Forrest Bennett, a Democratic state representative from Oklahoma City.
I desperately wish that our legislature would do more with the immense power that we have to help people. This doesn't help people. It does nothing to further the conversation about race, and I think it's an important one to have. It also distracts from so many of the other issues that are facing Oklahoma today.
It's worth lingering on one word in that last sentence, distract. Because while House Bill 2988 threatens our understanding of the past, it also, one could argue, carries an even larger threat to our future. To understand that, let's go to the bill itself. It's available for free at oklegislature.gov. And if you pull it up on your screen and scroll down to Section C, you'll read about what will happen to public schools that teach slavery the wrong way. Specifically, the bill explains that the State Board of Education will direct the State Department of Education to withhold a maximum of 5% of the monthly distribution of state formula funding to the education entity. Translating from legalese to English, that says the state will deprive schools of funding. Now, if at any point in recent decades you spent time in an Oklahoma classroom or put a child through one of our public school systems or even driven by a school, you know that less funding is the exact opposite of what Oklahoma schools need. In fact, our schools are so resource-starved that their deprivation was international news in 2018. Even the BBC covered it.
We lost our art classes. We used to have band, we used to have choir. It'd be cool if we had a nurse.
My daughter's in 2nd grade and she's in a district that goes to school 4 days a week.
These conditions were so prevalent and these grievances so common that Oklahoma teachers went on strike in April that year for the first time in nearly 3 decades.
The marched in today. And our friends from Western Heights just got here.
The governor at the time, Republican Mary Fallin, was dismissive initially, comparing striking teachers to teenagers wanting a better car. But she ultimately agreed to raises for teachers and support staff, even if these fell short of demands. Still, it seems fair to say her sympathies lay elsewhere. Here she is talking about education savings accounts in 2016.
An education savings account gives parents and gives students an opportunity to look at what's the best education for them and where to go.
If you're not familiar with these accounts, just think of school vouchers. These programs let parents take money designated for their children's public education and use it to pay for private school. With education savings accounts, parents can use this public funding not only for private school, but also for online learning programs, private tutoring, and other expenses. Either way, the fallout for public schools is the same. It's a hit on their finances. And Fallin's successor, Governor Kevin Stitt, doubled down on these programs in his State of the State address earlier this month. Like others who share his priorities, he emphasized school choice in his remarks.
And I pledge to support any legislation that gives parents more school choice. Because in Oklahoma, we need to fund students, not systems.
Governor Stitt highlighted in particular Senate Bill 1647, recently introduced by Republican State Senator Greg Treat from Oklahoma City.
Pro Tem Treat filed a bill called the Oklahoma Empowerment Act. It makes sure that money follows the student, and it would make us a national leader in school choice.
Days later, House Speaker Charles McCall, a Republican from Atoka, said that the bill would not be heard in the House and that it was effectively dead on arrival. But even without it, Stitt has secured his reputation as a private school champion. He's donated tens of thousands of dollars to these institutions and directed tens of millions of federal COVID relief dollars to private school students. Let's keep these policies, this high-level backing for private education, in mind as we return to the new headline-grabbing education bills. Besides Olson's slavery teaching bill and the anti-critical race theory law our correspondent Judy Williams covered last month, there's a trio of bills from State Senator Rob Standridge, a Republican from Norman. The first, Senate Bill 1141, demands an end to social and emotional learning, or SEL. Tara Shelton, SEL coordinator with Atlantic Public Schools, broke this concept down last June.
Well, social emotional learning gives the space where people can actually look at students as more than just numbers on a standardized test. We give people the space to explore who they are as people, to look at their identity, to recognize how important relationships are, and what it means to be a successful human, not just a successful student.
Sounds like an approach worth promoting, right? Well, that depends on who you ask. For right-wing commentators, SEL marks yet another effort to brainwash our children. Dr. Duke, an Alex Jones-style YouTube commentator, addressed SEL on his YouTube channel. He brought in a correspondent named Alex Newman to talk about SEL's alleged occult origins and, from his perspective, subversive ideology.
It's a glorification of homosexuality, a glorification of transgenderism, encouraging children to think that this is something normal that they should participate in, that's good and healthy and wonderful. And that was my first alarm bell. But I started researching social emotional learning, and I realized, this is just a bunch of gobbledygook. This is the kind of language that these so-called educators use when they want to hide something, when they want to conceal what they're really up to.
And SEL is just one of State Senator Standridge's targets. He also, through Senate Bill 1142, is going after public school libraries, insisting they remove so-called perverse material or suffer a $10,000 a day penalty for noncompliance. Finally, there's Senate Bill 1470. It proposes a $10,000 fine per incident per individual whenever public schools employ or contract with a person who contradicts a student's religious beliefs. Taken together, these regulations threaten public schools with the loss of funds, costs they can ill afford. And these bills undercut our education system in other ways. They increase scrutiny of instructors and librarians, transforming schools into hostile work environments. For the broader community, they raise panic about indoctrination, painting schools as places where radical teachers warp young minds with false histories, immoral ideologies, and perverted literature. With parents offered easy ways to opt out of public schools, whether through education savings accounts or something like the Oklahoma Empowerment Act, it seems possible that more of them will choose to do so. State education is the clear loser in this scenario, but we're not destined to watch the story play out. To prevent it from happening, however, we need to bear recent history in mind and to make sure we think critically about it, the same way we would want our children to think critically about the histories of slavery and systemic racism. In Oklahoma, that recent history involves repeated efforts to pack the Capitol, to get as many teachers elected to the state legislature as possible. That was the case back in October 2016, 18 months before the walkout, as Judy Woodruff reported on PBS.
In some parts of the country, it's not just the presidential race on voters' minds. State elections are taking center stage in some places, too, like Oklahoma, where education is the forefront of the ballot. Teachers are upset over spending cuts and what they see as a political assault on public education. They've decided it's time to take matters into their own hands. A record number of teachers are running for seats in the state legislature.
2 years later, that history repeated itself. Matt Hobbs, who ran for a House seat that year, and Renee Jordan, who set her eyes on the Senate, were just two among the record number of education candidates in 2018.
Crumbling textbooks, leaking ceilings, 4-day school weeks, and rising class sizes.
Enough is enough. Last year we had 4 different Spanish teachers. We can't keep a teacher for even 1 year.
But neither of them managed to secure a seat. And more generally, teachers failed to make a substantial impact in the 2018 contest. Of the 38 educators who ran for state House and Senate seats that fall, only 10 were successful. Even its underwhelming performance seemed to spread complacency among education advocates, however. Robbie Korth and Carmen Foreman discussed that trend for State Impact Oklahoma just before the 2020 legislative election.
So there are a lot fewer people running for the legislature this year, period, because the COVID-19 pandemic is making politics difficult. But the reduction of educators with legislative ambitions was perplexing, wasn't it, Carmen?
Yeah. Alicia Priest of the Oklahoma Education Association says the reason for the drop in educators running for office is simple. Lawmakers are more willing than ever to go to bat for education issues.
We have seen a shift in how the legislature works and their openness and their willingness to talk and vote for pro-public education issues. and to not put up for a vote things that would be harmful to public education.
There are a couple of ways to think about Priest's claim from our 2022 vantage point. On the one hand, House Speaker McCall's apparent refusal to even consider the Oklahoma Empowerment Act supports what she says, as does Governor Stitt's recent talk of teacher pay raises. But then there's the recent flurry of new legislation targeting what public school teachers say or even think, and what school librarians choose to make available for their students. In this context, is it time for teachers to consider another walkout to try to recapture some of the momentum they built 4 years ago? Should Oklahoma students learn from their peers in Chicago and Boston, just two places where young people led protests over inadequate COVID protections, or West Virginia, where recently public school students refused to attend an evangelical Christian revival on campus? These questions, without a doubt, are for school communities to decide. But in light of this intensified assault on public education, it seems wise to keep all options on the table. For Focus, Black Oklahoma, I'm Crystal Patrick in Oklahoma City.
You're listening to Focus, Black Oklahoma. In our next story, Shonda Little explores the motivations and tactics used by white supremacist gangs in the state and where they appear to be setting up shop. Here she is with more on the United Aryan Brotherhood of Southwest Oklahoma.
On October 11th, 2021, Governor Kevin Stitt released a statement through oklahoma.gov about his trip to the Texas-Mexico border. Stitt spoke about methamphetamine and fentanyl being trafficked to Americans, particularly Oklahomans. However, the irony that Governor Stitt would use state resources to visit the nation's border with Mexico while never speaking once about the criminal problems that Oklahoma faces from the Universal Aryan Brotherhood was not missed by all. Forrest Bennett, representing Oklahoma State House's 92nd District, shared multiple links to newspaper articles and press releases from law enforcement agencies related to crimes and convictions of the Universal Aryan Brotherhood members, also known as the UAB. The UAB is believed to have been founded in 1993 in Oklahoma's prisons. Today, their scope goes far beyond the prison walls of McAllister and other major penal institutions. What started as a problem primarily for prisons in Oklahoma's largest cities is now stretching to the state's most rural counties. Yet, as large as the problem appears to be, the UAB is rarely spoken of on a statewide level. However, Angela Marcy, District Attorney for Oklahoma's 2nd District, and jailers at the Beckham County Detention Center are all too familiar with the UAB's crimes. Marcy spoke about how the UAB affects crime in western Oklahoma and also the state's 77 counties at large.
The UABs are an extremely violent and well-networked gang, and so they act and commit crimes both within the prison walls as well as outside in our communities. They work with people both within the prisons and outside the prisons.
Although the UABs are known for their white supremacist iconography, DA Marcy made clear that the organized gang has no racial disparity in their victims.
They sell to addicts, and addicts are of all races. Money is only one color, it's green. That's what they care about at that point.
Marcy and other law enforcement have seen the UABs from metropolitan areas take up residence in rural Oklahoma. The causes are not totally known, but experts stipulate that being welcomed into specific industries, low cost of living, the autonomy of a new environment, and local poverty are playing a role.
There's lots of statistics, I think, about poverty levels and crime levels and substance use and alcohol use. And so the economy and how it's going certainly can impact what's going on criminally. The bigger issue, at least right now, that I think probably makes people more likely to become involved in one of these organizations is I believe our communities are pretty fractured right now with the isolation that we've had to endure due to the pandemic.
Captain Brandon Sims and Lieutenant Vincent Scott are both deputies with the Beckham County Sheriff's Office. The two men both work in the jail area of the Beckham County Detention Center. Their days are spent overseeing primarily the welfare of the inmates and the staff who attend to them. Captain Sims spoke of the impact the UABs have on the daily life at the Beckham County Detention Center.
The UAB is one of our most common gangs here at the facility. Their impact here, it can be big. They extort a lot of other inmates. They fight with a lot of other inmates, cause trouble, try to run the pods. They basically show their dominance back there, especially when they have a lot of brothers, is what I'll call them, just all UAB members. They will push us. They will try to see what they can get by with every day.
Lieutenant Scott spoke about how UAB members get others to smuggle contraband or commit other crimes on behalf of the gang.
You know, they're offered a lot of money to smuggle drugs or cell phones or, any kind of contraband in the facility during a visit. They make drops in various places within the facility and off the facility to be picked up. Some women do it for love. They love these guys. I think the biggest motive is probably money and also being active gang members themselves, bringing contraband in for these guys. They would hire prostitutes at Oklahoma City to bring it in. These guys are smart. They use a lot of different ways, a lot of manipulation to do it. I've seen them where they'll get a female staff member. They'll start that game with them. And before you know it, they're caught up in the game and they have to start bringing stuff in for them.
A quick online search of the Universal Aryan Brotherhood in Oklahoma demonstrates the pervasive nature of this white supremacist prison gang in everyday life. While Oklahoma's governor and other statewide elected officials continue to compete for airtime in discussing crime upon America's southern border, almost no one seems willing to talk about the dangers in their own backyard. For Focus, Black Oklahoma, I'm Shonda Little in Beckham County.
As community members reel with the day-to-day headlines of violent deaths of our Black and brown neighbors, a local library asked how we might heal together and express these challenging happenings with the whole family. Carlos Moreno has more about the Social Justice Story Hour.
Social Justice Story Hour celebrated its return at Tulsa's Pearl District building with Dr. Tiffany Crutcher reading the book Change Sings, A Children's Anthem by 23-year-old poet and activist Amanda Gorman.
I hum with 100 hearts, each of us lifting a hand. I use my strengths and my smarts, take a knee to make a stand.
As described on the Khalid Jabara Foundation website, Social Justice Story Hour is a, quote, feel-good, heartwarming, song-singing, child-dancing, storytelling, family-friendly event focused on social justice values, unquote. The event series was launched in September 2017 by the Khalid Jabara Tikkun Olam Memorial Library at B'nai Imuna Preschool. Each story hour is dedicated to a different theme, from death to immigration to celebrating Women's History Month. At this gathering on January 29th, themes of tolerance and peace were accompanied with fun songs by Simon Hajar of the band Hot Toast Music Company. Victoria Jabara spoke about the need for establishing the Khalid Jabara Foundation in response to the August 12, 2016 murder of her 37-year-old brother, Khalid Jabara, at the hands of a neighbor, Stanley Vernon Majors, who had a history of verbally abusing the Jabara family, referring to them as, quote, dirty Arabs and, quote, filthy Lebanese, unquote. He was arrested in 2015 for hitting Khalid's mother, Hafia Jabara, with his car while she was walking near her home. Majors was charged with assault and battery with a deadly weapon, leaving the scene of a collision involving an injury, violating a protective order, and public intoxication. Majors was released from jail at the end of May 2016 and continued harassing the Jabara family. On the morning of his death, Khalid Jabara called 911 to tell police that he was worried he would be attacked. The police responded that there was nothing they could do. 8 minutes later, neighbors reported hearing gunshots. Victoria found herself at a loss as to how to describe these events to her family.
My daughter was going to preschool at the time at the synagogue down the street, B'nai Imuna, and we kind of started this whole, how do we talk to our kids, the littlest kids, about what happened to Layla's uncle? What vocabulary do we use? How do we help them process? Because kids can feel it. we started getting books, early childhood education books that are geared towards children on inclusivity, on diversity, on peace, on justice, on being a social justice warrior. And we created these social justice story hours for the littlest ones in our community. We had seen that there's nothing that had been done like that before.
A little more than 1 month later, on September 16th, 2016, Terrence Crutcher was murdered at the hands of Tulsa Police Department officer Betty Shelby. Crutcher was unarmed, standing near his vehicle, asking for help. His killing was captured on video by cameras on Officer Shelby's vehicle and an overhead police helicopter at the scene. Less than a week after the shooting, Shelby was charged with first-degree manslaughter. 8 months later, in May 2017, a jury deliberated 9 hours before finding her not guilty.
And we had to figure out a way to turn pain into purpose and our anger into advocacy and our trauma into triumph. And so we started this foundation to keep his name alive, to control the narrative. So often says that Black and brown people are bad. And that's exactly what was said about my brother the night he was killed. We've been on the front lines fighting rigorously for policy change, to change the laws that allow police officers to get away with this reckless behavior.
Since establishing the Terrence Crutcher Foundation, his sister, Dr. Tiffany Crutcher, has been advocating for policy changes such as establishing an Office of the Independent Monitor with citizen oversight and investigatory power, and focusing less on enforcement and more on mental health and diversion services. In addition to being sisters of men who were murdered as a result of racism, Victoria Jabara and Tiffany Crutcher are also both mothers, having to help their children navigate what happened to their families. The two women spoke of this experience and the hope that through these events, more families can have conversations and create positive change. Speaking first is Dr. Crutcher, then Victoria Jabara.
Amanda Gorman did a beautiful job showing kids that they can take a stand by taking a knee. She did a beautiful job saying we don't have to build tall fences or walls. We can build a bridge and help our neighbors. And so we have to be creative, but we also have to make sure that we educate them on the good, the bad, and the ugly. And in order to get to a place of reconciliation, there must be truth and acknowledgement.
When Layla was 3 is when my brother died, and it was, do we sugarcoat how he died? How do we talk about it? And I think you're absolutely right. I think kids should know history, they should know story, they should know why. I mean, maybe save them some of the gruesome details at that age and make it age appropriate. But I absolutely agree with you that understanding the history of why people think the way they do and why hate seeps generationally, I think is an important lesson so that we can get beyond that.
The Khalid Jabara Foundation is planning 5 more social justice story hour events throughout the year. For more information, visit www.khalidjabarafoundation.org. For Focus Black Oklahoma, I'm Carlos Moreno in Tulsa.
You're listening to Focus Black Oklahoma.
The data doesn't lie. Americans, especially African Americans, are at an all-time high risk of a variety of serious health issues. Robert Caddy and Sharita Sweet are here to discuss the value of mindfulness in the fight to overcome the issues within the body.
I am Robert L. Caddy.
And I'm Sharita Sweet. And we are continuing our series on the role of mindfulness and media in better health.
The goal of this series is to identify and provide alternative perspectives on how mindfulness and media can be utilized in addressing our present-day wellness circumstances.
This month, we focus on the roles of mindfulness and the strength that can come with a better perspective on what is considered healthy. Today, we shed some light on the trickle-down effect of the perceptions that establish beliefs, cause emotional reactions, that in turn support unhealthy mental addictions, that solidify behaviors. If only we knew and accepted the science of mindfulness.
Let us break down the science of health and wellness in connection with mindfulness. Again, there's a perspective which lays the foundation for an understanding. a perception that supports our thinking and the emotion that follows, which leads us into action. The reason why we're talking about mindfulness is related to how false perspectives support the regional health challenges of Oklahomans, the ethnic challenges of disparity in the Black community, and the overall wellness emergency of our nation.
A simple and yet correlative example of a regional myth would be that a diet high in red meat and hops is necessary to support the performance of oil-field and other blue-collar workers. The effects of a diet high in meat on the digestive tract, energy levels, and the fatigue that will set in after a period are as embedded in Oklahoma culture as the conditions for heart disease. With the love for soul food in Black communities and the awareness of the myth that some dishes, though obviously high in sodium and fat, are considered to be washed of their consequences through loving intention, though the intention of soulful preparation has never slowed the rising numbers of hypertension. George Howard of the Riles School of Public Health at the University of Alabama at Birmingham was quoted in an article from Reuters stating, "It is interesting that diet, more than being overweight, was the biggest contributor to the racial disparities in hypertension. Then there are those all-American foods, which oddly enough include French fries from Belgium, pizza from Italy, and hamburgers from Germany, which are at the root of a diverse list of health challenges that are plaguing the nation." As noted in a WebMD article from Dr. Carol Der-Sarkisian, a board-certified emergency physician, high amounts of 17 foods that are bad for your heart can lead to a diverse list of health challenges. Those foods include complex carbohydrates, cheese, and red meat.
Now, we want to talk about better health, but we do not want to make this conversation just about cuisine. The World Health Organization, or WHO, issued a statement in 2021 stating mental health and physical health have a bidirection and complex relationship. The WHO defined health as, quote, a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity, end quote. Mindfulness should be employed as a strategy in the battle to improve the lives of our nation because it can be used to address not only physical illness, but also mental illness, of which both food and drugs can be factors.
According to the WHO, mental health is an essential part of the health that contributes to the overall well-being of every individual. There are inseparable links between mental and physical health. Let's examine the rehabilitative sequence of mindful techniques used in correcting addiction and habits across the board, and connect them to the flow of acceptance we discussed earlier, which include perspective, perception, emotional response, and action. When we look into the mindful sequence of rehabilitation, we find pre-contemplation to be the first area addressed. Pre-contemplation, which is the result of an established cultural habit, for instance, the justification for certain foods in certain cultures, or the belief that smoking anything is harmless. This is pre-contemplation. Next, in the order of rehabilitative mindful strategies, comes the contemplation stage, which in context is like the thought that says, my diet is causing me to be overweight, but I enjoy not only baking cakes, but eating them too. This is also similar to the discovery of dark circles around the eyes of a methamphetamine abuser who wants to correct their appearance while still enjoying the high that comes with the drug. This is the equivalent of one wanting change, but still enjoying the habit. This is contemplation.
Preparation is listed in the rehabilitation process as the point when one starts taking steps to correct behavior, like starting to replace sugary snacks in the house with more live foods, or one starting meditation to control an addiction to anxiety. This is the beginning of the action phase. Continuing, there are action and maintenance, where the growth that leads to change begins. This part of rehabilitation is where the person seeking better health finds themselves working to solidify a healthy addiction for the reason of not relapsing. For example, not missing a day at a fitness facility, or basically proclaiming to become a vegetarian, or not going to a bar for a year. The goal is to prohibit relapse.
Though we are in the age of pharmaceutical dominance, there is a pill to address every ailment, and even as the COVID strain continues evolving, we are sure there will be another vaccine recommended as the sole solution. What about the myths that shadow ethnicities and the mental reprogramming needed to start the preparation phase? A question is, when do we employ the action and maintenance phase of national rehabilitation? How do we create a wake up world? You may be doing this all wrong episode.
We believe it starts with us initiating the conversation and shedding some light on the fact that we must use mindful techniques that will aid in the mental rehabilitation of our nation. For Focus, Black Oklahoma, I'm Robert L. Caddy.
And I'm Shrita Sweet in Tulsa.
When all the hubbub around Valentine's Day gets us down, what matters most is more than a sample. Let's listen as Sandra Slade shares her high school experience with the confusing holiday.
Love. When I think about love, there's so many things I associate with it. Hugs, food, rest, time to myself, and self-care at the top of my list. To me, one of the most confusing holidays is Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day is supposed to represent a day to show whomever you love the evidence of your love through a gift. How are you to capture it? What card, candy, flowers, or gift box could you buy that encompasses that? Many have tried, not many have succeeded. Valentine's is one of those days you're either excited about it or you can't wait till the 15th to get everything half off. The only holiday I ever cared about is Thanksgiving, period. Food and family is always a win. Well, except for that certain relative that can't cook. I remember working in a corporate office and many of the women were frantic on Valentine's Day, either teeming with scared anticipation or slight loathing because of others' excessive excitement. Because according to them, if so-and-so didn't send something to the office, they were finished. I often sat thinking, was the person who was supposed to be sending something as much on the brink of madness as the recipient? I would feel sorry for the delivery guys. Not only because they had to bring various balloons, flowers, and boxes, but because they would first walk through the dewy eyes of women anticipating a gift being brought to them, only for the same delivery guy to be met then with laser point angry stares as they left the office without delivering the gift that so-and-so was supposed to have sent by now. I'm sure many delivery people are loving social distancing so they don't have to deal with the empty, sometimes angry stares. One of my first jobs was working at the public library. I loved everything about the books, the quietness, and being able to lose myself in a story on break. My first boyfriend, Tim, worked at another public library. Our friends called us Dewey and Dew Decimal. Valentine's Day was approaching and Tim was so happy about what he was going to do for me. Me? Meh. I didn't care about it. Never was into flowers. Chocolates, yes, but not the she-poo-poo Russell Stover's kind, more like Twix and M&Ms. I always thought assorted flavors, more like a crazy game of let's make a deal. Besides, I always chose the wrong door. Yuck. As Valentine's approached, I started getting nervous. Was I supposed to get Tim something? Was a card sufficient? Did I need to get the little pasty chalk-like heart-shaped candy? Of course, as a teenager, I went to the great wisdom holders. You guessed it, my friends. My overly dramatic friend Heather told me that my gift should be something he would cherish forever. Forever? Really, we were 15. Gina told me that women were not really to give a guy a gift, but something simple, because it wasn't about them. Lucy said that I should have put some thought into it, like she had, and picked out a gift 6 months before. As I look back on this, I realized, wow, peer pressure can be a pressure cooker. So there went my idea of just getting a card, some Red Hots, and chalky inscribed hearts. My aunt, maybe out of pity for me for the look of my card, decided that I needed some advice. Aunt Belle said as she looked at my attempt, "Sweetie, in whatever you give, make sure it's more memorable than a sample." Which was confusing to me because I remember many times cruising Sam's just to get a sample. Love. So many metaphors and memories surrounding food. Why? The libraries were holding a joint party, so I knew I would see Tim later that day. I still hadn't written anything on the card. I even thought about just pasting the chalky heart-shaped candy to the card. Time was running out, and I was out of ideas. One of the older librarians saw me, and she was already in a tizzy, yelling about how men just didn't understand women. I took it with a grain of salt, as this was her 5th boyfriend in 3 months. Through her hiccups, she said, so had better show and prove today, or that was it. Let me tell you, so-and-so did not show and improve. Then there was Tim, grinning from ear to ear. He presented me with a card with roses on it, a huge white teddy bear, and a box of Martinelli apple juice. Oh yeah, he was what I learned later was a big spender. I was speechless. I felt he could hear my heart dropping with the feeling of being unprepared. I handed him my card, with the dolly now slightly sliding off. I couldn't find anything deep to write, so I took 2 library return cards and wrote, "Hopefully, as we grow, we will always have as many adventures as the books we work around." I had stamped them with our hire dates. This time, Tim was speechless. He took the card and smiled so brightly at me. We held hands as we sat in the children's section. I told him how nervous I was about Valentine's Day. He laughed and told me that the gifts were something his mom helped him pick out, because she didn't raise us so-and-so not to give anything for Valentine's Day.
Focus Black Oklahoma is produced in partnership with KOSU Radio, Tulsa Artist Fellowship, and Tri-City Collective. Additional support is provided by the George Kaiser Family Foundation and the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Philanthropies. Our theme music is by Moffat Music. Focus Black Oklahoma's executive producers are Quresh Ali Lansna and Bracken Clark. Our associate producers are Nick Alexandrov and Vanessa Gaona. Our production intern is Smriti Iyengar. Visit us online at kosu.org, tricitycollective.com/Focus Black Oklahoma, and YouTube at Tri-City Collective. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Focus Black OK. You can hear Focus Black Oklahoma on demand for free at kosu.org, NPR One, npr.org, or wherever you get your podcasts.
KOSU values input from our listeners and the communities we serve. That's why we have the KOSU Texting Club. By texting the word hello to 844-777-7719, you'll sign up to get occasional messages from reporters about stories they're working on and from KOSU staff about news happening at the station. Text the word hello to 844-777-7719 to add your voice to our newsroom today.